So, it's been announced today that on, I believe, April 17th, Jake Paul will be fighting Ben Askren. And I'm sure more of you out there watching this know who Jake Paul is than the amount of people who know who Ben Askren is. For those who don't know who Ben Askren is, I'll save you the time of searching him up. He's a 19-2 record MMA fighter. He fought in, I believe, either Bellator. I think it's Bellator he fought in. Maybe that or World Series of Fighting. Regardless, he had he's either 18-2 or 19-2. I believe he's 18-2. I think he joined the UFC when he was either 17-0 or 18-0, and he became Bellator welterweight champion. And he's known for his grappling. I don't think he'd ever knocked anyone out on the feet. As if anyone doesn't know about MMA, you start the fight, you're on your feet. It's like a kickboxing match, and if someone takes you to the ground, it turns into a wrestling match, and you have to hit on the ground, and you can choke people out. You can win by knockout, decision, or by tap out. And I think the majority of his wins were all of his wins were either by going the distance, by doing all the rounds, or by tapping his opponent out because he took him to the ground and choked them. He's a very, very good wrestler. He was, I don't think he went to the Olympics, but he was like a college wrestler. He was world-class wrestler. If you look at his wrestling, he is incredible. But he got taken on by the UFC and from Bellator, and he had his first fight. Yeah, this is where his career went downhill. So he had his first fight in the UFC. He got put up against a former UFC welterweight champion who's been on the decline in the last 5 years, called Ruthless Robbie Lawler. And the fight starts. Because Robbie Lawler is known for his knockout power on the feet, and Ben is known to not have that at all and have no skill on the feet, as soon as the fight starts, Ben doesn't even throw a punch, he just tries to grab his leg to take him down. And he tries for the first 10 seconds to desperately take Robbie Lawler down. Because Robbie is good on the ground, but he's not in the calibre of Ben Askren when it hits the mat. The takedown goes wrong. Robbie lifts Ben Askren over his head, throws him, slams him down, basically on his neck. Ben nearly gets knocked out from the slam, and Ben is on the ground. Robbie's above him now, and Robbie is hitting him with some of the hardest shots I've ever seen anybody take without going out. And this is like 30 seconds into his UFC, the biggest platform of fighting in his career, the biggest eye-opener fight for people in his life. This is his biggest opportunity to get fans from the UFC. And in the first 30 seconds, he's nearly knocked out from the punches by a UFC fighter who has, I think it was 15 losses. And he takes the punches, manages to grab a hold of Robbie, struggles, they end up getting back onto the feet, but he still have a hold of each other. Robbie lands a couple knees on him. Ben is losing this fight, but he manages to take Robbie down to the ground, and as Robbie tries to stand up to his feet, Ben gets a hold of his neck. Basically, Robbie is facing the same direction as me. He's got him in it's like a headlock, but instead of just holding him there, he wraps his arm like that and is doing that. So it's squeezing Robbie's neck and it's choking him. He's got him in what's called a bulldog choke, and he's squeezing and squeezing and squeezing, and Robbie's arm goes down, and it looks like he was tapped. He looks like he was out cold, and that means the ref has to stop the fight. The ref stops the fight. Ben Askren wins. As soon as he lets go of Robbie, Robbie is like, I wasn't out. So as soon as that fight happens, even though Ben won, he got nearly knocked out in the first 20 seconds, and also he shouldn't have been made the winner at that specific moment. He would have won the fight eventually if he held it for like another 5 seconds, but his opponent wasn't asleep. Regardless, he won the fight, won his UFC debut, nearly got knocked out, but then he got put in against someone who was known as a journeyman in the division called Jorge Masvidal. and there was a lot of trash talking. Ben Askern was talking trash about everyone in the division. Everyone was like, he's this new person who's going to be future champion. And he was talking trash to Jorge Masvidal because Jorge had like 12 or 13 losses in his career from like split decisions. And he had a couple wins, couple losses in his last fight. But everyone was like, Ben's just going to take him down and maul him. And that's what Ben said he was going to do. Jorge Masvidal said he didn't like this guy, and he wanted to do damage to him. And if the fight could go up until the last 5 seconds, where he finishes Ben Askren, that's what he would do. The fight lasted 5 seconds. The fight starts. Like last time, Ben Askren went straight for a takedown against Robbie. He goes to do the same to Jorge, but Jorge runs at him from leaning against the cage and jumps in the air and hits him with a knee. As Ben is leaning down, he gets hit right here with a knee, gets knocked out cold. This is his second fight in the UFC, getting put in there against a journeyman who has 13 losses, gets knocked out cold in the first 5 seconds. Fastest knockout in UFC history. Now that's a meme of Ben Askren. Then he gets put in against arguably the best grappler in the UFC, because they were both known as, obviously, Ben Askren and his opponent, who was Damian Maia. They got put in against each other. Main event of a card that wasn't very big. Not many people bought it, considering what happened in Ben Askren's last fight. It went 3 rounds. They stood up quite a bit, and you really got to see how bad Ben Askren was at throwing punches. He was very, very bad. He was losing on the feet. He was losing the rounds. And it was back and forth, they were taking each other down, but because of Damian Maia's elite wrestling as well as Ben's, it was a scramble for submissions a lot, but eventually Ben Askren got caught in a rear naked choke where Damian Maia was on his back, and he wrapped his arm around his neck, tightened it, and squeezed, and eventually Ben went to tap out, but he passed out from lack of oxygen, and the ref stopped it. Ben Askren now, having 3 fights in the UFC, had won 1 and lost 2 in a row. Ben calls it quits. Ben is about 34 years old at this point. This is end of 2019, and he calls a retirement. He also needed a major hip replacement or a hip surgery or something like that, and he said he wouldn't be the same after that, especially with the grappling, so he said he'd call it quits. And we hadn't heard of him since. It's now come out that he's fighting Jake Paul, someone who is obviously a famous YouTuber, fought on the undercard of KSI versus Logan Paul back in August 25th, 2018, won by 5th round TKO against KSI's younger brother, Deji. It was a competitive fight for the first few rounds, but Deji's stamina got the better of him, and Jake Paul just had better stamina than Deji that night. And Jake is tall and he is powerful and he's got some natural skills, but he fought someone who didn't really train that hard to beat him. And Deji really did put up a good effort in the first 2 rounds of their fight. And there's always questions about it. If Deji trained fully, what would have happened that night? And we won't know. That's fair enough to say. And Deji is like 3 or 4 inches shorter than Jake, and he was not in as good shape as Jake before that fight. He wasn't in as good shape as Jake at the fight, but point is, Jake looked for an easier match because KSI, when he called out Logan Paul and Jake Paul after he beat Joe Weller, he said, Jake Paul, Logan Paul, he said Jake Paul's name first. First thing Jake said was, oh, I'm not fighting you, fight my dad. KSI said no. Jake was like, I'm not fighting you, fight this little kid instead, mini Jake Paul. KSI said no. Then he was like, okay, I will fight KSI, but it's got to be an MMA match with MMA rules, blah blah blah, in America, stuff like that. All on Jake's rules. KSI is the one calling him out. Now Jake is saying it needs to be this, it needs to be that, as if he's like some kind of world champion. KSI says no. Logan Paul comes back and says, I'll do it. So eventually KSI says, alright then, Logan's the easiest one to deal with. I'm gonna fight Logan Paul. And they fight. It's a draw. Jake Paul is saying, oh, I want to fight again. I want to fight KSI. KSI says no, because he's training for Logan Paul now, and now, especially when KSI went on like a music tour, promoting his music, doing whatever he wanted to do, Jake Paul's training and wants to call out KSI when KSI is overweight and doing a music tour. He's not worried about boxing. But eventually KSI and Logan Paul get a rematch sorted because it was a draw in their first match. Controversial, but fair, I believe. And they fight again. It's in America. KSI wins on the points. And Jake Paul cries backstage about it, says boxing is rigged. Then 2 months later, fights KSI's training partner, who's 5'8". Jake Paul is 6'1", 6 foot, 6'1", one or the other. And he fights someone who's 5'8", and had trained for about as long as KSI, and is known to leave their chin open, because they get caught all the time in their fights. Anything Gibb, all respect to Anything Gibb, he's a pressure fighter. He comes at you, throws punches constantly, but is known to leave his chin in the air, so he gets caught a lot. But in his previous 2 fights with Gibb had left his chin open, but he has a head guard on. It's alright, it's not going to hurt him. They agreed to have this as a professional fight with lighter gloves and no head guards. They fight. Gibb does well for the first 20-30 seconds. Eventually, Gibb's balance, and or lack thereof, gets the better of him. Jake starts jabbing him on who's 4 inches shorter than him. And eventually the big shots start coming through, and the lack of head guard really makes a difference to Gibb. Not only because Jake Paul is better than any person Gibb had ever fought at that point, but also because there is no head guard to absorb that damage. Gibb gets dropped. They weren't proper knockdowns, like he was never on his back, but he'd get hit, and it would be powerful enough that Gibb would put his hand on the ground or put his knee on the ground, which counts as a knockdown. And after 3 knockdowns, because they fought in Florida, the ref has to wave it off. If you get knocked down 3 times in a round in Florida, and I'm sure in other places too, but in Florida especially, since that was where they were fighting, fight gets called off. Everyone's like, okay, Jake Paul has won a professional fight. He's 1-0 professionally. So is KSI, since he beat Logan Paul. Now let's get them fighting. Then the pandemic happens. Jake wants to fight KSI. KSI releases a new album, and is making songs now in the charts in the UK. He's pursuing other things before he goes back to his boxing, which is, I'm sure in a lot of people's eyes, understandable, because if he was going to lose the fight against Jake Paul, he's wasted how many months of his life doing something that ended up being fruitless, when he could do something that everyone is interested in and could get him more eyes from people who aren't just his YouTube fans. But Jake Paul stops uploading. He just sticks to boxing, and he eventually fights again in November 2020 on the undercard of the Mike Tyson and Roy Jones card. And he fights Nate Robinson, who's an NBA player who's 5'9". Nate Robinson had never boxed in his life. He's 5'9". He's in good shape. He's an athlete, but he had no boxing skill. Jake Paul has been training at this point for about 2.5 years. Jake Paul mops the floor with this guy and then calls out Conor McGregor and a bunch of other athletes like Dylan Dennis and I can't remember who else, KSI, so another YouTuber from the Ace family, which is a family channel. But he doesn't really call out KSI too much, because he's calling out all these celebrities, and he's starting to act like a persona that we've never really seen him as. Clowning Conor McGregor and his wife, and now he's saying that he's going to fight Ben Askren. What he believes, I think, is that people will think he's actually good because he fights people that should be good fighters, because he fought a professional athlete who is a basketball player though, and had never boxed in his life. Now he's going to fight an MMA fighter, but the MMA fighter trains as a grappler. He doesn't throw punches. He's never been good at throwing punches, and now he's fighting him in a boxing match. I don't care if he's an MMA fighter, that doesn't make him good at boxing. If you fought him in an MMA match, that'd make a lot more sense. But when you're fighting someone out of their own sport, not only that, like Conor McGregor when he went to boxing, that made more sense than this because Conor is a stand-up fighter. Ben Askern is not. Ben Askren is a world-class grappler and spends the majority of his time training that, and also has been retired for the last year and a half. And has also just had a major hip replacement or hip surgery, so is obviously not going to be at his 100% best. What I think Jake is looking for is not only an easy payday, but an easy promotion, and also an easy ego boost, because I'm not saying Ben Askren is going to be easier than his other fights. This will be harder than the fight against Nate Robinson and Gibb, but it's not going to be as hard as a fight should be if you're a professional boxer. Jake Paul is looking for easy fights to boost his ego and try and inflate his stock value to the world, when I'm sure 90% of people, or people with a brain on their heads, that aren't Jake Paul fans basically, boom, roasted, little Ben Askren nod there, but anybody who has double digits in IQ knows that Ben Askren is not going to be able to stick with him, and just because he's an MMA fighter who's retired and got knocked out in 5 seconds in one of his last fights against someone who knew how to throw punches, anybody like that knows that he ain't going to stand a chance against Jake Paul. But Jake Paul wants to make it look like because he's an MMA fighter that makes him better for whatever reason. When if there's a 3-minute video of Ben Askren trying to box in his fights and looks like a drunk teenager trying to throw hands. No offense to Ben Askren, but I know that he's a world-class fighter, and people go about that in their own ways when it comes to MMA, whether it be stand-up, trying to knock people out, trying to spin, knock like kicks and stuff like that, or take someone down and maul them. And that's what Ben Askren did, and I respect that. But don't have someone who trains grappling in a boxing match and try and make yourself big for winning, when everybody else knows that person doesn't know how to box. Anyway, it's on April 17th. I probably watch it. I'm not paying a pay-per-view for it. I ain't paying. I'm not paying to watch Jake Paul in general. 2, I'm not paying Jake Paul to knock out someone who doesn't know how to box and then call out every name in the book after. But it's just the world we live in, isn't it? But who do I think is going to win? Jake Paul. How do I think he's going to win? I've heard it's an 8-round fight. So I would say Jake Paul round 3 or 4. I don't think he's going to go for the finish early in this fight. And Ben Askren is tough. He can take shots, considering he's done it for many years. Like Gibb and Nate Robinson and Deji hadn't. They were new to training and getting hit in general. Ben Askren has been hit a lot in his career. He is in his mid-30s now. I believe he's 35 or 36. But we'll see how this fight goes. I don't think it'll be worth a pay-per-view. We'll see what happens. But until the next big headlines come out that I want to talk about, Ben MG Scully is out.